They say some betrayals cut deeper than a knife. But what happens when the betrayal comes from the people you love the most, the people you built your life around, the people you swore to protect, and the ones who swore to protect you? What happens when the ones you trust become the monsters you never imagined you'd have to face? This story is not for the faint of heart. It's a tale that blends law, love, power, and perversion into one unthinkable tragedy. A respected sheriff. A seemingly stable family. A home that should have been a haven, but behind closed doors, it hid the darkest kind of secret. A secret so vile, so horrifying, that when it finally came to light, it led to 10 gunshots echoing through the Florida night. 10 bullets. 1 man dead. And a community left asking, how could this happen? Our story begins in a quiet town in Florida, where Sheriff Marisol Vega, a decorated officer known for her iron discipline and fierce devotion to justice, had built what most people would consider the American dream. A lovely home. A devoted husband. A beautiful teenage daughter. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect. But what no one saw was the slow, crawling rot under the surface. The kind of rot that doesn't show up in family portraits or Christmas cards. The kind of rot that festers in silence, until someone snaps. What happened on that fateful night wasn't just a moment of rage, it was the explosive culmination of secrets, lies, and unbearable pain. Sheriff Vega didn't just discover her husband was cheating. She didn't just catch him with another woman. No, she caught him with their own daughter. The horror of that moment, the heartbreak, the fury, the betrayal, it broke something inside her. Something that had held together through years of service on the force, through the brutality of crime scenes and the strain of public duty. But this was personal. And she didn't hesitate. This story is as much about justice as it is about trauma. As much about crime as it is about human psychology, the breaking point of a woman pushed too far. A mother. A protector. A sheriff. We'll dive deep into this haunting case, uncovering the disturbing family dynamics, the red flags that were missed, the chilling details of the crime scene, and the agonizing aftermath. We'll hear from neighbors, experts, and those who were close to the family. We'll walk you through the investigation, the media frenzy, the legal drama, and the questions that still linger like smoke from a gun that's just been fired. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about what happens when the law isn't enough to protect you from the evil under your own roof. This is the case of Sheriff Marisol Vega, and the 10 gunshots that shattered a family forever. To understand how something so horrifying could unfold in a seemingly stable home, we need to go back, not just weeks or months, but years. We need to look at who Marisol Vega really was, who her husband had become behind closed doors, and how a family that appeared so strong was slowly falling apart beneath the surface. Marisol Vega was more than just a sheriff, she was a force. A woman who carved her way through the ranks of law enforcement in a male-dominated world, one hard-earned promotion at a time. Born and raised in Orlando, Florida, Marisol was the daughter of Cuban immigrants who instilled in her a fierce work ethic and an unshakable sense of justice. She had the reputation of being tough but fair, the kind of officer you wanted on your side in a crisis, and the kind of leader who could hold an entire department together under pressure. She met her husband, Anthony Vega, at a community outreach event nearly 20 years earlier. He was charming, articulate, and full of ambition, a real estate developer who knew how to work a room and had dreams of building an empire. Their chemistry was instant. Within a year, they were married. 2 years later, they welcomed their only child, Isabella. At first glance, they were a power couple, Marisol enforcing the law, Anthony building wealth, and little Isabella growing up in a comfortable, middle-class home with every opportunity laid at her feet. But as with many families that look perfect from the outside, behind the scenes, there were cracks. Small, almost invisible at first, but over time, those cracks began to widen. Anthony had always enjoyed the spotlight. He liked attention, validation, and not just from his wife. As Marisol's career began to take off, so did the distance between them. While she worked long hours, buried in case files and court hearings, Anthony's nights got later, his phone became harder to reach, and whispers started to emerge, rumors of affairs, suspicious business deals, even gambling debts. Marisol, ever the professional, pushed these concerns aside. She had a job to do. A community to protect. And a daughter to raise. But Isabella saw more than anyone realized. By her early teens, Isabella was becoming more withdrawn. Her grades, once stellar, began to slip. Teachers described her as quiet, anxious, sometimes volatile. She lost interest in sports, dropped out of theater club, and was seen crying alone on more than one occasion in the school bathroom. When asked about it, she would always deflect. "I'm just tired," she'd say. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. And no one knew the depth of what was happening. Neighbors described the family as private. Too private. They rarely hosted visitors. Anthony was seen occasionally mowing the lawn or chatting with delivery drivers, but Marisol's presence was often felt more through patrol cars than backyard BBQs. And Isabella? She mostly stayed inside. No parties. No boyfriends. No friends over after school. And then, there were the sounds. One neighbor, who asked to remain anonymous, reported hearing shouting late at night. Sometimes it was Anthony's voice, loud, angry. Other times, it was muffled sobbing. No one ever called the police. After all, Marisol was the police. In hindsight, the red flags were everywhere, only they were hidden beneath the silence of a family used to performing for the world. And for Marisol, the silence had become her defense mechanism. She knew something was off. Anthony had become colder, more controlling. He criticized the way she parented, mocked her dedication to her work, and started keeping secrets, locked drawers, late-night drives, disappearing credit card statements. She confronted him once, maybe twice, but his responses were always the same. Gaslighting. Denial. Charm. "You're overreacting," he'd say, with that crooked smile she used to find endearing. "You've been working too hard. Maybe you need a break." But the real break was coming, just not in the way either of them expected. Behind that cold, growing wall between husband and wife, something far darker was happening. Something that would twist every fiber of morality, every sacred boundary between parent and child. And it was happening right under Marisol's nose. In the months leading up to the crime, Isabella's behavior became erratic. She would stay up all night, then sleep through school. She became hypervigilant around her father, flinching when he touched her shoulder or leaned in too close. She stopped eating at the dinner table. Her eyes, once bright, now looked hollow. Distant. As if a part of her had shut down completely. If this story touched you, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. It means more than you know. These voices deserve to be heard, and your support helps keep their stories alive. Still, Marisol didn't see it. Or maybe, she didn't want to see it. She'd spent her entire life chasing justice in the streets, but missed the danger hiding in her own home. Until one night, one ordinary night, she came home early from work. She wasn't supposed to. A meeting had been cancelled, and rather than sticking around the precinct, she decided to surprise her family with takeout and a movie night. It was supposed to be a rare night of reconnection. A peace offering to the tension that had quietly infected their home. But what she walked in on, would shatter everything. And when she reached for her service weapon that night, she wasn't doing it as a sheriff. She was doing it as a mother. It was just after 7:48 p.m. on a warm Florida evening, a Friday like any other in the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Brookfield Heights. The sun had dipped behind the palm trees, casting long, amber shadows across manicured lawns. In the Vega household, all the lights were off, except for a soft glow seeping through the cracks of Isabella's bedroom window. Sheriff Marisol Vega parked her squad car 2 blocks down. Not because she was trying to hide. It was habit. After years of being on call, she'd learned the art of quiet arrivals. She held a plastic bag with takeout containers in one hand, her car keys in the other, and walked up the driveway with the kind of ease that only came from years of routine. What happened next was not routine. As Marisol opened the front door, the silence inside struck her as odd. No television. No music. No footsteps. Just silence. And then, faintly, a sound from upstairs. A soft, rhythmic creaking. Whispered voices. Her instincts kicked in, honed from 2 decades on the force. She drew her weapon, heart pounding not from fear, but from confusion. Something was wrong. She knew it. She felt it in her bones. She ascended the stairs like she would in a tactical raid, slow, precise, controlled. Each step bringing her closer to the sound. Closer to the truth. And then she reached Isabella's door. It was partially open. Just enough for her to see through the narrow slit. And what she saw, she would never forget. Not for the rest of her life. There was her husband, Anthony Vega, completely undressed, in an unspeakable position with their 16-year-old daughter, Isabella, who was frozen in what looked like paralyzed horror. Marisol's mind shattered into 1,000 pieces in that instant. There were no words. No screams. Just rage, raw, primal, and explosive. She kicked the door open. Anthony turned. His expression, shock, then something else. Defiance. He reached for something, a robe, maybe. But Marisol had already raised her service pistol. And then, 10 deafening cracks split the silence. She didn't stop after the first shot. Or the second. She emptied the clip into the man she once loved. Into the man who had violated everything sacred in their lives. Into the father who had become a predator. He collapsed to the floor in a heap of blood and flesh, eyes wide open, frozen in the moment of his final breath. Isabella screamed. Not a loud, sharp scream. But a low, broken wail. Her body slid to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. She didn't run. She didn't move. She just curled into herself and sobbed, as Marisol stood motionless, the barrel of her gun still smoking. She didn't try to flee. She didn't hide what she had done. She made the call herself. "This is Sheriff Marisol Vega," her voice crackled over the 911 dispatcher line. "There's been a shooting. Send a unit to 2182, Magnolia Drive. I've shot my husband. He's dead." When the first responding officers arrived, they were met with a scene straight out of a psychological horror film. Anthony's body was sprawled across the carpet, blood splattered against the pastel walls of Isabella's bedroom. Marisol was still holding her firearm, standing guard over her daughter, not as a sheriff anymore, but as a broken mother. The responding deputy, a younger officer named Torres, immediately recognized her. His hands trembled as he ordered her to lower her weapon. She complied. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, local media outlets swarmed the neighborhood. "Sheriff involved in domestic shooting," one headline read. "Florida sheriff shoots husband in daughter's bedroom," another blared. But none of them knew the full story, not yet. Protocol demanded that Marisol be taken into custody immediately, and she didn't resist. As officers handcuffed her in front of her own department, there was no anger in her eyes. No protest. Only emptiness. Back at the station, she was booked and placed in an interrogation room, not the one she usually sat on this side of. The one meant for suspects. For criminals. Across from her sat Internal Affairs Agent Samuel Graves, flown in from Tallahassee to oversee the investigation due to Marisol's rank and long-standing ties within the department. "Tell me what happened," Graves said, voice low. Marisol looked up, her face pale. I came home early. I saw them. I saw what he was doing to her. Did he threaten you? He didn't have to. Her voice broke. He was hurting my daughter. That was enough. Meanwhile, Isabella was taken to a child trauma specialist for evaluation. It took hours before she spoke a single word. But when she did, it all came spilling out, years of grooming, manipulation, and unspeakable abuse at the hands of her father. He had started when she was barely 13. It began with inappropriate comments, accidental touches, and slowly escalated to isolation and coercion. He convinced her to keep quiet by threatening her mother's career, saying that if anyone found out, Marisol would lose everything. And so Isabella stayed silent. Until that night. The crime scene was processed by a neutral third-party unit to prevent bias. Ballistics confirmed that all 10 rounds had been fired from Marisol's service-issued Glock 19. Autopsy revealed that Anthony Vega had died instantly from gunshots to the chest and head. Toxicology showed traces of alcohol and benzodiazepines in his system. Investigators recovered a hidden camera installed inside Isabella's bedroom closet, confirming long-term surveillance by Anthony. On his laptop, found in his home office, were folders containing hundreds of encrypted files labeled with dates, many of them suspected to be explicit recordings. The evidence was damning. News of the incident tore through Florida like a storm. Some called Marisol a hero, a mother who protected her child when the system failed. Others questioned her actions, wondering if the shooting was excessive, or if justice should have been served through the courts. Protests erupted on both sides. Victim advocacy groups rallied behind Isabella, demanding better laws to protect minors from familial abuse. Meanwhile, civil rights organizations raised alarms about due process and the dangers of emotionally driven vigilante justice, even from law enforcement. The media had a field day. Interviews with neighbors, former co-workers, and even high school teachers of Isabella were aired night after night. Some described Anthony as charismatic and always friendly. Others called him controlling, arrogant, and weirdly obsessed with Isabella's privacy. One particularly haunting interview came from Isabella's childhood friend, Jamie Carr, who said, "I always thought something was weird. He never let Bella hang out much. And when she did, she was always checking her phone like she was being watched. I wish I'd said something. I wish I'd known." By the end of the first week, the case had become national news. But behind the media circus, the real story, the pain, the trauma, the broken family, was unfolding in ways no headline could capture. Marisol sat in a cell, not as a sheriff, but as an inmate. Isabella sat in therapy, not as a teenager, but as a survivor. And Anthony lay in a morgue, not as a husband or father, but as a man whose darkest secrets had finally caught up with him. The booking photo of Sheriff Marisol Vega was a shock to the nation. The woman who had once stood proud in uniform, decorated with pins of merit and awards of valor, now wore a prison-issued jumpsuit. Her eyes, red from crying. Her lips, tightly pressed. Her face, unreadable. She had been the face of law and order in Central Florida for over a decade, and now, she was charged with second-degree murder. Why not first degree, the public asked. Why not self-defense, others demanded. The legal line between justified rage and unlawful execution was razor-thin, and Marisol Vega was now walking it, barefoot and bleeding. The state moved quickly. Despite the overwhelming evidence of abuse discovered in Anthony Vega's digital files and Isabella's harrowing statement to Child Services, prosecutors were under pressure. The case was too big, too public. A sheriff shooting someone, even her husband, 10 times inside her own home. The optics alone were explosive. State Attorney Janice Durham, known for her meticulous adherence to the law, held a press conference outside the courthouse. "We recognize the complexities in this tragic case. Sheriff Vega is a decorated officer and a mother. But no one, not even those sworn to uphold the law, is above it. Durham charged Marisol Vega with second-degree murder, use of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and reckless endangerment of a minor, the latter for discharging a weapon in the presence of Isabella. The charges shook the nation. Supporters rallied behind Marisol, calling her actions those of a desperate mother protecting her child. Others argued the law was the law, and if emotion dictated justice, the system would collapse. The legal battle was on. Marisol's defense team was led by Victor Navarro, a well-known trial attorney with a reputation for turning impossible cases into courtroom triumphs. Navarro, a man with silver-streaked hair and a voice like smooth gravel, didn't mince words. "This is not the story of a sheriff who snapped," he told the jury during pre-trial motions. "This is the story of a mother who walked in on a predator assaulting her daughter. And in that moment, she didn't see a husband. She saw a threat. And she did what any mother would do. She protected her child." Navarro immediately filed motions to suppress the murder charge, arguing justifiable homicide under Florida's Stand Your Ground law, a controversial doctrine that allowed individuals to use deadly force without the duty to retreat, if they believed their life or the life of another was in imminent danger. He presented forensic reports, psychological evaluations of Isabella, and records of Marisol's spotless service history, decorated with bravery awards and citations of restraint. He didn't try to deny the shooting. He embraced it. Yes, she pulled the trigger. Yes, she emptied her weapon. And yes, she would do it again to save her daughter's life. Prosecutor Janice Durham took a different route. Her argument wasn't that Anthony Vega was innocent, in fact, she acknowledged the abuse. But her focus was on intent, proportionality, and due process. "Justice is not served by vigilante violence," she said before the court. "Even when we're dealing with monsters, we don't get to become monsters ourselves." Durham painted a picture of a crime of passion, one that might have started as a justified intervention but escalated into overkill. 10 shots. Not 2. Not even 5. 10. Including 2 to the head after Anthony had already collapsed. She brought in a forensic psychiatrist who testified that the pattern of fire suggested rage-fueled execution, not self-defense. The prosecution also presented surveillance footage from Marisol's body cam, not activated during the shooting but turned on shortly after. In it, Marisol could be heard whispering over Anthony's body, "You took everything from me." Everything. Durham pounced on those words. That's not the voice of a protector. That's the voice of a wife betrayed, exacting revenge. It was a devastating blow. Outside the courthouse, the world split in two. Some held up signs that read, "Justice for Marisol." Every parent's worst nightmare, protectors not prisoners. Others came with posters that read, "No one is above the law, guns aren't justice." The media couldn't get enough. Every nightly segment featured courtroom reenactments, expert panels, legal analysts, psychologists, and interviews with abuse survivors. One viral TikTok user posted, "If y'all think I wouldn't do what Marisol did, you're crazy. Let a man touch my child and see what happens." Even celebrities weighed in. Actress Viola Davis tweeted, "What mother wouldn't become the weapon to protect her child?" On the other hand, legal scholars warned of the precedent. What does it say when an officer of the law doesn't trust the system she's sworn to uphold? Questioned a Harvard law professor. It was more than a trial. It was a national reckoning on justice, rage, and the limits of parental protection. Halfway through the trial, a bombshell. Isabella took the stand. At just 16 years old, she faced a courtroom packed with cameras, strangers, and her mother, seated silently in shackles. Her voice trembled. But her words? They shook the room. "He used to tell me that if I ever said anything, Mom would be fired. That people wouldn't believe me. That she would be blamed. He said she loved her badge more than me." She paused. Looked at Marisol. And added, "He was wrong." She described the years of abuse in painful detail. How it started. How it progressed. How she once begged to be sent to boarding school, anything to escape him. Her testimony silenced even the prosecution. But then, Durham dropped her own twist. She introduced a journal, found in a safe in Anthony's office. It contained chilling entries, Anthony's words. Fantasies. Confessions. And one particularly disturbing line dated just weeks before the incident, she's starting to pull away. If Marisol finds out, it's over. I need to get ahead of it. Some saw this as motive. Not for Anthony, but for Marisol. Proof that he was planning something drastic. Proof that her actions weren't revenge, but preemption. The judge ruled the journal admissible, a major win for the defense. After 6 weeks of testimony, expert opinions, legal arguments, and soul-bearing accounts, the trial neared its end. Navarro's closing statement was a masterclass in empathy. This isn't about 10 bullets. It's about 10 years of silent suffering. About a mother who walked in at the worst moment imaginable, and had seconds to act. She didn't choose violence. It was forced on her. And what she did was not murder. It was mercy. Durham, sharp and composed, gave her final words: even heroes must be held accountable. Even good intentions have consequences. The law is not about emotion, it's about justice. The jury was dismissed. The world waited. They called it the trial of the decade. But it felt more like a courtroom crucible, where justice, pain, and morality were melted down in full view of the nation. The trial of Sheriff Marisol Vega wasn't just about the law anymore. It was about the limits of love, and how far a mother could go before justice turned into vengeance. As the trial moved into its final weeks, every day brought fresh gasps from the gallery. The stakes had never been higher. The most haunting testimony came from Isabella. When she walked to the stand, slight, pale, composed, the courtroom went silent. Marisol, shackled and dressed in a muted gray suit, could barely meet her daughter's eyes. This wasn't just a testimony. It was a reunion. A reckoning. Isabella took a deep breath. Then began. The first time he touched me, I was 11. A wave of shock passed through the room. Some jurors blinked, others dropped their gaze. He always made it seem like I was the one who should be ashamed, but I wasn't the one hurting anyone. She described the manipulation, the threats, the secret text messages disguised as school check-ins. How she hid it all from her mother, not because she didn't trust her, but because she didn't want her to suffer. I thought I was protecting her, until I realized she was the one who'd protect me. She broke down as she recounted the night of the shooting. The door creaking open. Her father's weight. Her mother's voice, sharp and cold like a blade slicing through the air. She didn't shoot my father. She saved me from him. The courtroom wept. With Isabella's testimony weighing heavy, the defense leaned into the raw emotional power of the moment. Victor Navarro knew he had to tread carefully. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted understanding. He replayed the forensic report showing Anthony had been shot in the chest and shoulders, and only after he collapsed, did 2 rounds enter his head. She didn't walk in with the intent to kill. She walked in with the instinct to protect. Navarro called a psychologist who specialized in trauma-induced rage. The expert explained how in moments of extreme threat, the brain doesn't process violence in a step-by-step way, it floods with adrenaline, blurs morality. Especially for a mother witnessing her child's abuse. But the prosecution wasn't done. Janice Durham wasn't about to let emotion cloud the law. She brought forward audio from Marisol's interrogation, just minutes after the shooting. Interrogator: did you feel threatened when you fired? Marisol, long pause, no. Not at me. At her. Always at her. Durham turned to the jury and asked a single question: if she wasn't in danger, then why keep shooting? She argued that what happened wasn't a protective act, but a psychological break, one that bypassed due process and turned the sheriff into a self-appointed executioner. The jury deliberated for 31 hours over the course of 4 days. Outside the courthouse, crowds camped with signs, candles, and chants. News helicopters hovered overhead. Isabella, protected by the state, had gone into hiding. Marisol waited, pale, trembling, flanked by 2 guards, for the verdict that would decide the rest of her life. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, the air was electric. The foreperson stood. A hush fell. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant, not guilty. A cry erupted from the gallery, a mix of cheers, sobs, and gasps. On the charge of reckless endangerment of a minor, guilty. A mixed bag. Relief. Regret. Reflection. The judge thanked the jury, then addressed Marisol. While the court recognizes your intent was rooted in maternal protection, discharging a weapon in proximity to a child cannot be dismissed. He sentenced her to 24 months of supervised probation, mandatory trauma counseling, and permanent surrender of her badge. As Marisol walked out of the courtroom, a free woman, no longer a sheriff, forever a mother, the crowd burst into applause. Some hugged her. Others just cried. She said nothing to the press. Just held up her daughter's hand, eyes swollen with tears, and walked away from the courthouse, as if finally letting go of a storm she'd carried for far too long. But not everyone agreed with the verdict. Victim advocates raised concerns about vigilantism. Law enforcement leaders questioned the message it sent. And conservative commentators argued that justice had been twisted by emotion. Still, the overwhelming reaction from the public was support. Marisol became a reluctant symbol of a mother's fury, a survivor's strength, and the legal system's complexity. Isabella eventually left Florida for college, starting a new life in California. In a rare interview years later, she said, "What my mother did saved me. And for the first time in a long time, I sleep peacefully. That's more than justice. That's freedom." If this story moved you, even just a little, then please, don't just click away. Stories like this. The painful, raw, human ones, they deserve to be heard. And the only way they reach more people, is if you hit that like button, share it, and subscribe. I pour my heart into telling these stories the way they deserve to be told, with depth, with care, and with truth. But I can't keep doing that without your support. If you felt anything while watching this, sadness, anger, hope, then do something small that makes a big difference. Click subscribe. Leave a comment. Share it with someone. Don't let this just be another video you forget in a few hours. Let it matter.